Armine is a social justice advocate. She is a person who is passionate about matters of public policy and equality. She is very active in her own faith tradition. Armine is a person who talks and walks the talk. So please today join me in welcoming Armine Yalnizyan.
I have been involved in your 4 rounds of community hearings since 1990, and another one's about to be launched with the Voices from the Margins. And what I find fascinating is how you bring voices, energy, and urgency to this fight against poverty. Though I'm an economist and I have economic reasons to care about poverty, I also care very personally about poverty. I focus on the facts and I focus on my religion, and you can do that both. We have more poverty in Canada than in many countries in the world, but we are the 11th largest economy on the surface of the planet with a fraction of the population. We could have any kind of world we wanted in our borders. Poverty costs us all financially in both the short and long run, and the human costs are huge from suffering and denying potential. Toronto just passed a unanimous resolution to introduce a poverty reduction strategy locally. And every province except for British Columbia has or is working on a poverty reduction strategy. We've been blessed that in 2009, our government decided to pass a piece of legislation dedicated to reducing poverty. We're grateful, but it's not easy to access exactly how much progress we've made, partly because of data problems. Thank you, Mr. Harper. But that shall be over in the next 5 or so years, and the data that we do have show some interesting points. First of all, in Ontario, elderly poverty has declined a little bit since the recession to around 8%. But that's because many couples that live together who are seniors are doing better than ever, down to about 3% poverty rate for couples. For the little old ladies living alone, it's up to about 25%. 1 in 4 women in Ontario who are seniors and living on their own are living in poverty. But the biggest story when it comes to poverty reduction is the story about our children. And there we have always seen the highest poverty rates amongst our children. The latest poverty measure from StatsCan shows that 19% of Ontario's children live in poverty. 19%, that's 1 in 5. That's throughout the province. And we know that Toronto is the poverty capital of Ontario. And what we know is that good policies make a difference, a huge difference. What else we know? The preoccupation with maintaining order and not achieving justice is going to not serve us well. It's not a coincidence. People that are doing fine right now want the status quo. Change brings about surprises and disorder. People don't want to see their taxes go up. People don't want to see more expenditures on the poor. That's like a tax and spend philosophy that they think has been, ruled out of order. But what we know is that when concern about disorder is greater than the concern about injustice, you get more of both. So what is it that we can do as a group? Well, Pope Pius VI said, if you want peace, work for justice. We know that charity isn't enough to serve the cause of justice, because the cause of justice, my friends, is to challenge the status quo. Some are guilty of being greedy and immoral in our midst. We are all responsible to challenge that. We are all responsible to try to make what is moral legal. We need to all work together to reduce the exploitation of workers, to increase their ability to fight for their own rights, to provide access for housing that is decent, for mental health in a timely way, to open pathways for opportunity. We can't sacrifice all at the altar of economic growth. Now, we've seen some great changes. We have seen the recent reversal of healthcare cuts for refugees. We've seen the province expanding dental care for young people. We've seen the promise from the feds that we will have more affordable housing built because of their investment in social infrastructure. But these changes happened because of our concerted action. And concerted action requires focus and energy. We need to do so much more. We need to raise the adequacy of social assistance incomes. We need to expand access to primary care. We need to provide supports for the growing number of incarcerated young people, modernize our labor laws to account for the new realities of the gig economy, temporary and precarious work. To get there, you're going to need to fire your engines. To get there, you're going to have to get way beyond the facts. You're going to have to feel it. You're going to have to get angry about it. Angry about some aspect of the injustice that is triggered by poverty. That's your rocket fuel. That's how things change. St. Augustine told us hope has two beautiful daughters. Their names are anger and courage. Anger at the way things are, courage to see that they do not remain that way. First of all, let's get angry. How do we get angry? Well, the best way for you to get angry is walk a mile with the poor that you know. I've been poor before. It's very personal to me. I've been poor 3 times in my life. But I never lived on a welfare budget until I did during Lent with my family in 2006. And what I learned in those 40 days was appalling to me. What I learned about the growing isolation, how quickly it comes, how it reduces your opportunities, and what a 2% increase in social assistance actually means for a family of 4 on social assistance. It meant $1 a day for my family. It meant nothing. And that's what we keep getting, budget after budget, 2% increase in social assistance. We can all live in solidarity with those who have the least in some way for some period of time, and I promise you, my friends, it will strengthen your spine. The anti-poverty movement in this country needs a movement. More people need to get mobilized. More people need to feel an eagerness for change to happen. We should ask all of our elected leaders to do the same. You know, volumes have been written about the problems of poverty and rising inequality. I've written a lot of those volumes. But for millions of Canadians, it means a lived reality of insecurity of food and housing. It means social isolation. It means very few opportunities for change and huge risks. You can't afford to make any mistakes. At the same time, never has the money and opportunity been so abundant for so few. As income polarization turns into spatial polarization in our midst, where we live, those divisions in lived realities are becoming harder to bridge in our communities. But we can turn things around. Democracy is based on the representation of the people, for the people, by the people. Poverty doesn't live far from affluence in our neighborhoods, but our elected representatives rarely reflect these realities. That can change. I propose that every elected representative, whether that's a councillor, an MPP, or MP, should be required to live for 1 month in the first year of their term in the poorest neighborhood of their riding or ward. 1 unit of social housing could be kept available for this purpose. The place where we put our poor, we should keep one unit of housing, just like we have rectories for our right? So we keep 1 unit of housing available for this purpose, or a hotel that is used by Children's Aid or shelter services. The monthly budget of these people that we elect to represent all of us, not just some of us, for that month would equal the low-income measure. Half of the median after-tax income of their riding, adjusted for the size of their household. Now, they couldn't use a car with that money. Transit, food, and other needs, including medications, would come out of this budget. Difficult daily choices are guaranteed. Justice for thousands of their fellow citizens, in whose interests they were elected to represent. And after a few years, my friends, all of our politicians would know how the other half lives. What transit is like, where fresh nutritious food can be found, the state of repair and affordability of the housing in that neighborhood, the safety of those streets at night, the availability of quality childcare nearby, whether there are recreational and green spaces within walking distance, and what kind of condition those spaces are in. Nothing, I guarantee you, nothing would better focus the mind on the challenges faced by our least advantaged fellow citizens. Nothing would better trigger the imagination of these elected representatives for practical ways to tackle income inequality. Anti-poverty work is fundamentally about saying we have so much and we are asking so little of ourselves. How do we change that? Anti-poverty work is about changing the sensibility that we are doing enough. We could achieve so much more if we pull together and just do a little bit more. We, the faithful, we as society cannot get to where we need to go by simply doing good deeds straight from the heart. Charity alleviates the effects of poverty, but justice seeks to eliminate its causes. Charity is a matter of personal attribute, But public good does not automatically arise from private virtue. Justice is a matter of public policy, and we have to change our public policy. You know what I have learned in the more than 30 years that I've been with ISARC, and that I've pursued my own pilgrimage in my faith? What I have learned is that justice is central, not ancillary, to what God requires of us. That is the insight of our faith teachings, and increasingly of technology. You know, we are inseparable from one another. We belong to one another. We are indivisible. There are no borders. It's unclear where you end and I begin. And you know what? That's the way God made us. Our only sin and our always sin is that we put asunder what God has joined together. Let us work together to reduce poverty once and for all. Thank you.
Good theology helps us discern what is meaningful and ultimately important for who we are, for what we care to do with our lives, and for what God intends as the ultimate destination of creation in our communities. All our faith traditions address these life questions. And often a faith-based worldview stands in stark contrast to the way the world is. What is the meaning that can be offered by ISARC and faith communities? I think most of you are aware that when ISARC began, it began by members of the faith communities agreeing when Clark MacDonald and in the ensuing months asked us to help the SARC, agreeing to what I would describe as the preferential option for the vulnerable, to addressing issues of hunger, homelessness, and poverty. And ISARC went on to articulate 6 middle axioms for public policy shared by all the faith communities that participated over the years in ISARC. First was human dignity, the second was mutual responsibility, the third social equity, the fourth economic equity, the fifth fiscal fairness, and the last ecological sustainability. It was this faith-based values consensus that informed and made possible ISARC's public engagement, and dare I say at times conflict, with successive governments in this very place here at Queen's Park. No one is anyone without everyone else. People matter. But as so often is the case in the machinations of the political process and the organizations and institutions that we serve and the implicit impulses of programs, often we forget the bottom line for the work we do, and that bottom line is the people we serve, that their lives and well-being might be enhanced, that their lives may flourish, and they may be part of the broader human family we call the community. People do matter, and it means something to those who can easily be forgotten. When ISARC had hearings or organized events, these became public moments when people on low income, people with disabilities knew, if only briefly, that they belonged and that their voices would be heard. A central meaning of these 6 pillars and principles, is, as I've often said, is that no one is anyone without everyone else. Being a community of faith in what I call the public commons involves living with a bit of uncertainty here, living with a bit of vulnerability to others. I often tell my students, they're not always thrilled with this, some of them are sitting over here as well, that the most compelling, important theological question is not what you believe with certainty. Rather, the most compelling question is, how have I changed my mind about what I believe, and why did I change it? Likewise, people of faith are deeply thoughtful people. Rationality is not something that's devoid in faith communities and not something to avoid, but it's something to develop and nurture. For it is through reasoned understanding of how the world works, how people tick, that we can discern the presence of the divine in our midst. ISARC is a way of illustrating a public multi-faithfulness that the world, for the world, for people of faith that does not fear the other, but that embraces differences and diversity as a source of strength and character.